A killer's gentle touch. Sofia Ricci had always known that love was a weakness in their world. But the night she let him kiss her in the dark, she sealed her fate. Because he was not just anyone, he was the heir to the enemy's empire. And when the truth came crashing down, when she was dragged before her father like a prisoner awaiting judgment, he was already there, standing beside her. You should have never touched her, her father growled. Luca just smirked. Then you should have locked her away, old man. Chapter 1. The Shadow of a Forbidden Kiss. The rain lashed against the stained glass windows of the Palazzo Ricci, each drop a percussive echo of the turmoil brewing within Sofia. Outside, Naples glittered, a deceptive tapestry of light and shadow, much like the life she led. Tonight, the city felt particularly oppressive, the humid air thick with a scent of salt and impending storm. She traced the intricate pattern of a rose etched into the glass, her reflection superimposed over the familiar, yet increasingly alien, world outside. Sofia Ricci, at 58, was a woman sculpted by time and tradition. Her silver-streaked hair, usually bound in a severe chignon, had come loose, a few rebellious strands framing a face that bore the map of a life lived within strict boundaries. Her eyes, once a vibrant, defiant hazel, now held a weary resignation, reflecting the countless compromises she'd made for the sake of family, for the sake of the Ricci name. Tonight, however, a flicker of something else, something akin to longing, sparked within their depths. The grand ballroom downstairs pulsed with the muffled sounds of the annual Ricci Gala. Laughter, the clinking of crystal, the strains of a string quartet, all carefully orchestrated to project an image of unshakable power and unity. An image Sofia had meticulously maintained for decades, playing the role of the dutiful daughter, the grieving widow, the silent matriarch in waiting. But tonight, the charade felt heavier than ever. The memory of his kiss, a stolen moment in the shadowed garden of the Villa Bellini just a week ago, clung to her like the scent of his cologne, a heady mix of sandalwood and something wilder, something dangerous. It had been a reckless act, a betrayal of everything she stood for, yet it had awakened a part of her she thought long dead. A part that yearned for something more than duty, something beyond the suffocating confines of her gilded cage.
Luca.
Even his name felt forbidden, a whisper of rebellion against the ancient feud that had divided their families for generations. He was the heir to the Moretti Empire, their sworn enemies, the serpent in their carefully cultivated garden. And yet, in the darkness, under the cloak of a starless Neapolitan night, he had been simply Luca, a man with eyes that saw past her title, past her carefully constructed facade, to the woman beneath. She remembered the feel of his hand on her lower back, guiding her gently into the shadows, the way his breath had hitched when she'd looked up at him, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The kiss had been brief, hesitant at first, then deepening with a hunger that had shocked her, a hunger that mirrored her own. It had been a kiss that tasted of risk, of forbidden fruit, and the terrifying possibility of something real. A sharp rap on the door shattered the memory, pulling her back to the suffocating present.
Signora Ricci?
It was Marco, her father's ever-present, ever-watchful consigliere. His voice, even through the thick oak, held a note of urgency. "Come in, Marco," Sofia said, smoothing down the silk of her emerald gown, a color chosen to echo the Ricci family crest, a constant reminder of her lineage. Marco entered, his face, a mask of carefully controlled neutrality, betraying nothing. He was a man of her father's generation, his loyalty absolute, his methods often unpleasant. He stood stiffly, his dark suit impeccable, his gaze unwavering. "Your father requests your presence, Signora." Immediately, Sofia felt a chill crawl down her spine, despite the stifling heat of the room. Her father, Don Alessandro Ricci, rarely requested anything. He commanded, and his summons, delivered with such formality, could only mean one thing: trouble.
"Did he say why?"
she asked, though she already suspected. The whispers had been circulating for days, the furtive glances, the sudden silences when she entered a room. The family had eyes and ears everywhere, even in the moonlit gardens of neutral territories. Marco hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his usually impassive face. It concerns the incident at the Villa Bellini. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. So it was out. The stolen kiss, the whispered words, the moment of reckless abandon all laid bare before her father's judgment. She closed her eyes for a moment, steeling herself. She had known the risks, had danced with them willingly. Now it was time to face the consequences. She straightened her shoulders, the weight of generations settling upon them. Then lead the way, Marco. The walk to her father's study felt longer than usual, each step echoing the heavy beat of her heart. She was acutely aware of the portraits lining the hallway, the stern faces of her ancestors staring down at her, their silent judgment a palpable force. She was a Ricci, and the blood of warriors and survivors flowed through her veins. She would not cower. She entered, and will face her destiny. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Palazzo Ricci. The study was a sanctuary of masculine power, a room steeped in the scent of old leather, expensive cigars, and the subtle, ever-present aroma of fear. Don Alessandro Ricci sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a figure carved from granite and old grudges. He was a man who commanded respect, not through warmth or affection, but through an unyielding will and a reputation forged in ruthlessness. Even at 75, he radiated an aura of menace, his eyes, the same hazel as Sophia's but devoid of any softness, capable of freezing a man's soul with a single glance. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a pair of antique lamps that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the already imposing room feel even more claustrophobic. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on history, law, and strategy, the tools of a man who ruled his empire with an iron fist. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, providing a deceptive sense of warmth that did nothing to ease the chill that had settled deep in Sophia's bones. Standing beside her father, a figure almost as intimidating, was Luca Moretti. The sight of him, here, in the heart of the Ricci stronghold, sent a jolt of shock and a strange, unsettling thrill through Sophia. He was dressed in a dark suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and lean frame, his black hair slicked back, revealing the sharp angles of his face. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, met hers across the room, and for a fleeting moment, Sophia saw a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher: defiance, certainly, but also something else: concern. Sophia, Don Alessandro's voice was a low growl, a sound that had made grown men tremble. You know why you are here. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Sophia lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. I believe I do, Papa. You believe? He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the desk, the knuckles white with barely suppressed rage. You were seen. With him. He spat the last word as if it were poison. In the gardens of the Villa Bellini. A neutral territory, a place where even our families have agreed to a semblance of civility. And you disgraced us all. Sophia's gaze flickered to Luca. He stood impassive, his expression unreadable, but she could sense the tension radiating from him, the coiled energy of a predator ready to strike. He was a Moretti, after all, and the blood feud between their families ran deeper than any river, fueled by generations of betrayal, bloodshed, and unforgiving hatred. It was a mistake, Papa, Sophia said, choosing her words carefully. A moment of indiscretion. Indiscretion? Don Alessandro scoffed. Is that what you call consorting with the enemy? Betraying your family? Spitting on the memory of your husband? The mention of her husband, Carlo, a man she had married out of duty, not love, a man who had died 5 years ago in a boating accident that everyone knew was a Moretti hit, sent a fresh wave of guilt and resentment through her. She had mourned him appropriately, played the grieving widow to perfection, but her heart had remained untouched. Carlo is dead, Sophia said, her voice tight. And she hesitated, searching for the right words, the words that wouldn't condemn her completely. I was lonely. It was a weak excuse, she knew, but it was the closest she could come to the truth without revealing the depth of her yearning, the awakening that Luca's kiss had sparked within her. Don Alessandro rose from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate, each step radiating menace. He circled the desk, stopping directly in front of Sophia, his shadow looming over her. "Lonely?" he repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. "A Ricci woman is never lonely. She has her family, her duty, her honor. Those are her companions. Those are her solace." He reached out and gripped her chin, his fingers digging into her flesh. "You have forgotten who you are, Sophia. You have forgotten what it means to be a Ricci." Sophia met his gaze, her eyes flashing with a defiance she hadn't felt in years. "Perhaps," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I am beginning to remember." Before her father could respond, Luca spoke, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the tension in the room. "She has done nothing wrong, old man." Don Alessandro's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting to Luca with a venomous intensity. "You dare to speak to me in my own house? You, Amoretti, the son of my sworn enemy?" Luca smirked, a cold, arrogant expression that sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. "I dare to speak the truth. You accuse her of betrayal, but what of your own betrayals? What of the lies and the bloodshed that have stained both our families for generations? You should have never touched her," her father growled. Luca just smirked. "Then you should have locked her away, old man." The air crackled with animosity, the ancient feud simmering between them, threatening to erupt into open warfare. Sophia stood between them, caught in the crossfire, her fate hanging in the balance. She knew that this was more than just a reprimand. This was a power play, a test of loyalty, a prelude to something far more dangerous. The only way she might live is to show her father she will do anything to keep the family safe. Chapter 3. The Weight of Family Secrets. The silence that followed Luca's defiant words was thick with unspoken threats. Don Alessandro's face was a mask of fury, his eyes burning with a cold, hard light. Sophia could feel the tension radiating from him, the barely controlled rage that threatened to consume them all. She knew her father, knew the depths of his ruthlessness, the lengths he would go to protect the Ricci name and legacy. "You overstep, Moretti," Don Alessandro finally said, his voice dangerously low. "You are here at my sufferance, a courtesy extended because of certain agreements." Luca's smirk didn't waver. "Agreements that your family has repeatedly violated, old man. Agreements that are hanging by a thread, thanks to your impatience." Sophia watched the exchange, her mind racing. What agreements were they talking about? There were always whispers of uneasy truces, of delicate negotiations between the families, but the details were always shrouded in secrecy, known only to a select few. She had always been kept at arm's length from the true workings of the family business, shielded from the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of their opulent lives. "Enough," Don Alessandro snapped, turning back to Sophia. "Your liaison with this Moretti has jeopardized everything. The fragile peace we have maintained, the balance of power, it is all at risk because of your weakness." Sophia flinched at the word weakness. It was a label she had fought against her entire life, a constant struggle to prove her worth in a world dominated by men. She had always been strong, resilient, capable of enduring anything except, perhaps, the loneliness that had gnawed at her for years. "I understand the gravity of the situation, Papa," Sophia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I am prepared to do whatever is necessary to rectify it." Don Alessandro studied her, his gaze piercing, searching for any sign of deception. He knew her too well, knew the subtle nuances of her expressions, the almost imperceptible shifts in her tone. He could see the defiance in her eyes, but he also saw something else, a willingness to submit, to sacrifice, to atone for her transgression. "Whatever is necessary," he repeated, a hint of satisfaction creeping into his voice. Sophia met his gaze unflinchingly. "Yes, Papa. Whatever is necessary." A slow smile spread across Don Alessandro's face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes.
"Good.
"Because I have a plan. A way to salvage the situation, to turn your indiscretion to our advantage." He gestured to Luca, who still stood silently, watching them both with an intensity that made Sophia's skin crawl. "The Morettas have been uncooperative lately. They have been encroaching on our territory, testing our limits. This incident provides us with an opportunity, a chance to bring them to heel." Sophia's heart sank. She had a sinking feeling she knew where this was going. She had hoped, foolishly, that her father might show some mercy, some understanding. But she should have known better. In their world, love was a liability, a weakness to be exploited. What do you propose, Papa?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Don Alessandro's smile widened. "A marriage, a union between our families, a way to solidify the peace, to bind the Morettas to us permanently." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. A marriage? To Luca? To the man who had awakened her dormant desires, the man who was also her family's sworn enemy? It was unthinkable, impossible, and yet she knew it was the only way. The only way to protect her family, to avoid a war that would consume them all. You can't be serious," Sophia stammered, her mind reeling. "I have never been more serious," Don Alessandro said, his voice firm and unwavering. "This is the price of your transgression, Sophia. This is the way you will redeem yourself. You will marry Luca Moretti, and you will bring peace to our families." Luca, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke, his voice devoid of any emotion. "And if I refuse?" Don Alessandro's eyes narrowed. "Then you will face the consequences. A war between our families, a bloodbath that will leave both our empires in ruins. Is that what you want, Moretti?" Luca met his gaze, his expression unyielding. "I want what is best for my family," he said. "And I will not be forced into a marriage I do not desire." "You have no choice," Don Alessandro said coldly. "Neither of you do. This is the only way. The marriage will take place within the month. The arrangements will be made. And you will both cooperate." He looked at Sophia, his gaze hardening. "You will do your duty, Sophia. You will be a dutiful wife, a loyal Ricci. And you will ensure that this union serves our interests. Do you understand?" Sophia closed her eyes, the weight of her family's secrets, the burden of her own desires, pressing down on her. She had no choice. She was a Ricci, and her fate was sealed. She nodded in defeat. Chapter 4. A glimmer of defiance. The days that followed were a blur of activity, a whirlwind of preparations for a wedding that felt more like a strategic alliance than a celebration of love. The Palazzo Ricci buzzed with the comings and goings of dressmakers, caterers, florists, and lawyers, all working under the watchful eye of Don Alessandro and his lieutenants. Sophia moved through it all like a ghost, a silent observer of her own impending doom. She had barely spoken to Luca since that fateful night in her father's study. He had been kept largely isolated, confined to a guest suite in a separate wing of the palazzo, their interactions limited to brief, tense encounters during planning meetings. He remained an enigma, his true feelings hidden behind a mask of stoic indifference. She couldn't tell if he resented her, pitied her, or felt nothing at all. The one small act of defiance she allowed herself was in the choice of her wedding dress. The traditional Ricci wedding gown, a heavily embroidered ivory silk confection that had been passed down through generations, remained untouched in its velvet-lined box. Instead, Sophia chose a simple, elegant gown of deep crimson, a color that echoed the fire she felt burning within her, a silent rebellion against the suffocating traditions that had bound her for so long. The dressmaker, a timid, elderly woman named Signora Rossi, had initially protested, her eyes wide with alarm. "Signora Ricci, the traditional gown it is expected," Sophia had cut her off with a firm shake of her head. "I will not wear white, Signora Rossi. I am not an innocent bride. I am a woman making a sacrifice, and I will wear a color that reflects that." Signora Rossi had eventually acquiesced, her nimble fingers working expertly to alter the crimson gown to fit Sophia's slender frame. As she worked, she had hummed a soft, melancholic tune, a traditional Neapolitan love song about a woman forced to marry a man she did not love. Sophia had found a strange comfort in the melody, a shared understanding of the burdens women often carried in silence. One evening, as Sophia stood on the balcony overlooking the sprawling gardens of the palazzo, lost in thought, she heard a soft voice behind her. "It is a beautiful view, is it not?" She turned to see Lucas standing in the doorway, his hands tucked into the pockets of his dark trousers. He looked less guarded than usual, the harsh lines of his face softened by the fading light. "It is," Sophia replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But beauty can be deceiving." He stepped onto the balcony, joining her at the railing. The scent of him, that familiar blend of sandalwood and danger, filled her senses, stirring a mix of emotions she couldn't quite define. "You are quiet," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of the city. "I expected more resistance."
Sophia sighed.
"What good would resistance do? My father has made his decision. Our fates are sealed." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes searching her face. "You believe that? Don't you?" She countered. He shrugged. "I believe in making my own fate as much as possible. But I also understand the constraints of our world." There was a long silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets in the garden below. Sophia felt a strange sense of connection to him, a shared understanding of the burdens they both carried. "Why did you kiss me, Luca?" she asked suddenly, the question that had been haunting her for weeks. He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. I don't know," he said finally, his voice rough. "It was a mistake. A moment of madness." But Sophia didn't believe him. She had seen the look in his eyes that night, the flicker of desire, the hint of something deeper. She had felt it in his touch, in the way he had held her, as if he were afraid to let go. "Was it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He turned back to her, his gaze intense.
"It was dangerous," he said.
"For both of us. But was it a mistake?" She persisted. He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "Perhaps," he said, his voice low and husky. "But some mistakes are worth making." His touch sent a shiver down her spine, a jolt of electricity that awakened a longing she had tried to suppress. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment, savoring the feeling of his hand on her skin. "We are playing a dangerous game, Sophia," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know," she replied, her voice equally soft. "But perhaps we can win." He pulled her closer, his body pressed against hers, the warmth of him radiating through her. She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw a flicker of something in his eyes that mirrored her own desire, her own defiance. He may change his mind, his plans for her. He wanted to kiss her. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Shared Past. He didn't kiss her. Not then. He pulled back, a flicker of regret crossing his features, as if reminding himself of the invisible walls that separated them, the obligations that bound them to their families, to their destinies. The moment, charged with unspoken longing, dissolved into the cool evening air, leaving Sophia with a lingering warmth on her skin and a renewed sense of confusion. The following days were filled with a strained formality. Wedding preparations continued at a frenetic pace, each detail a stark reminder of the impending union, a union neither of them had chosen. Sophia found herself increasingly drawn to the Palazzo's library, a quiet sanctuary filled with the scent of aged paper and forgotten stories. It was there, amidst the towering shelves, that she discovered a hidden alcove, a small, forgotten room filled with old family records, diaries, and letters. She spent hours poring over the brittle pages, tracing the history of the Ricci family, uncovering stories of love and loss, of betrayal and sacrifice. She learned of her great-grandmother, Isabella, who had been forced into a similar arranged marriage to solidify a truce with a rival family, a marriage that had ultimately ended in tragedy. She read of her grandmother, Emilia, who had defied her family and eloped with a penniless artist, only to be brought back in shame, her spirit broken. As Sophia delved deeper into the past, she began to see a pattern, a recurring theme of women trapped by circumstance, their lives dictated by the needs of the family, their desires sacrificed on the altar of duty. She saw echoes of her own life in their stories, a chilling realization that she was following in their footsteps, walking a path paved with heartbreak and regret. One afternoon, while searching through a box of old photographs, Sophia stumbled upon a small, faded portrait of a young woman with striking blue eyes and a mischievous smile. The woman looked remarkably like Luca. On the back of the photograph, in delicate, faded script, was written a single name: Caterina Moretti. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Caterina Moretti. She had heard whispers of her, Luca's mother, a woman shrouded in mystery. The official story was that she had died in a car accident when Luca was a child, but there were rumors, dark whispers of a more sinister truth. Some said she had been murdered, a victim of the ongoing feud between the families. Others claimed she had run away, unable to bear the weight of her life as a Moretti. Intrigued, Sophia began to search for more information about Caterina. She scoured the library, the archives, even the old, dusty storerooms of the palazzo, piecing together fragments of information, whispers of a past that had been carefully buried. She discovered that Caterina had been close friends with Sophia's own mother, a friendship that had been kept secret, a forbidden bond between two women trapped in a world of violence and hatred. One evening, as Sophia sat in the library, surrounded by stacks of old documents, Luca entered. He had been avoiding her, she knew, but tonight, he seemed drawn to the same quiet sanctuary. "You spend a lot of time here," he said, his voice soft, breaking the silence. Sophia looked up, startled. I find it calming," she replied, gesturing to the books around her. He nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. "My mother used to love libraries," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "She said they were portals to other worlds, escapes from reality." Sophia's heart ached for him. She knew the pain of losing a mother, the emptiness that never truly healed. "I found something," she said, her voice hesitant. "Something about your mother." She held out the faded photograph of Caterina. Luca took it, his fingers tracing the image of his mother's face. His expression was unreadable, a mix of grief, longing, and something else, anger. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice tight. "In an old box of family photographs," Sophia replied. "There were other things, too. Letters, diaries mentioning your mother." Luca's eyes narrowed. "What kind of things?" Sophia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She didn't want to cause him more pain, but she also felt a growing need to uncover the truth, to understand the past that had shaped their present. "Whispers," she said finally, "secrets, illusions that she didn't die like they said she did." He was quiet. The room was silent, the tension between them palpable. She felt a shift in the atmosphere. He wanted answers. Chapter 6. The unveiling of Luca's truth. Luca's hand tightened around the photograph, his knuckles turning white. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, filled only with the crackling of the fire in the hearth and the distant sounds of the city outside. Sophia watched him, her heart pounding, sensing the turmoil raging beneath his calm exterior. He looked up at her, his blue eyes dark with a mixture of pain and suspicion. "What else did you find?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. Sophia hesitated, then took a deep breath. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, delving into secrets that had been carefully guarded for decades. But she couldn't ignore the pull of the past, the need to understand the forces that had shaped their lives, their families, their destinies. "Letters," she said, "between your mother and mine. They were close. Closer than anyone knew." Luca's brow furrowed. "Close?
How?"
Sophia reached for a stack of faded, yellowed letters, tied together with a frayed ribbon. She handed them to him, her hand trembling slightly. They wrote to each other for years, secretly, sharing their hopes, their fears, their disappointments. Luca took the letters, his fingers carefully unfolding the brittle pages. He began to read, his eyes scanning the delicate script, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to a growing sense of horror. Sophia watched him, her heart aching for the pain she knew he was experiencing. The letters revealed a hidden world, a world of forbidden friendships, of shared dreams, of a longing for something more than the violence and hatred that define their family's existence. Katerina and Sophia's mother, Isabella, had met in secret, sharing their struggles, their hopes for a different future, a future where their children wouldn't be bound by the ancient feud. As Luca read, he learned of his mother's growing disillusionment with the Moretti family, her increasing fear for her son's safety, her desperate attempts to find a way out, a way to break the cycle of violence. The last letter, dated just days before Katerina's death, was filled with a chilling premonition, a sense of impending doom. "I fear for my life," Isabella, Katerina had written. "I have discovered something terrible, something that could destroy us all. I don't know who to trust anymore. I fear that they will silence me before I can reveal the truth." Luca looked up at Sophia, his eyes filled with a mixture of grief and fury. "They killed her, didn't they?" he said, his voice raw with emotion. "My own family. They killed my mother." Sophia reached out and touched his arm, offering a silent gesture of comfort. "I don't know for sure, Luca," she said softly. "But the letters suggest a conspiracy. A cover-up." Luca slammed his fist on the table, scattering the letters and sending a jolt of fear through Sophia. "Who?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Who was responsible?" Sophia shook her head.
"I don't know," she said.
"The letters don't mention names. But there are hints, allusions to someone powerful, someone within your family." Luca paced the room, his agitation palpable. "My father?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Could he have been involved? Sophia hesitated. She knew the implications of what she was about to say, the potential consequences of accusing Luca's father, the head of the Moretti Empire. But she couldn't lie, not anymore. "It's possible," she said softly. "The letters, they suggest that your mother had discovered something that threatened him. Something that he would do anything to keep secret." Luca stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes filled with a chilling determination. "I need to know the truth, Sophia," he said, his voice firm. "I need to know who killed my mother. And I need your help." Sophia could feel the intensity of his gaze, the expectation. He was no longer a man, but a weapon, willing to do everything for the truth. Chapter 7. Masks and Midnight Confessions. The request hung in the air between them, a silent pact forged in the dimly lit library, surrounded by the ghosts of their ancestors and the weight of their shared history. Sophia knew that helping Luca would mean betraying her own family, risking everything she had ever known. But she also knew that she couldn't turn away, not now, not after uncovering the truth about Katerina, about her own mother's hidden friendship, about the web of lies and deceit that had entangled their lives. "I will help you, Luca," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "But we must be careful. We are dealing with powerful forces, people who will stop at nothing to protect their secrets." Luca nodded, his expression grim. "I know the risks, but I am prepared to face them. I owe it to my mother, to myself." They spent the rest of the evening poring over the letters, searching for clues, for any hint of the truth that Katerina had uncovered. They discovered coded references, veiled allusions, whispers of a secret that had been buried for decades, a secret that threatened to unravel the fragile peace between their families, to ignite a war that could consume them all. As the night wore on, a sense of intimacy grew between them, a shared purpose that transcended their family's feud, their impending marriage, their individual fears. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices barely audible above the crackling fire, sharing their vulnerabilities, their hopes, their fears. Sophia learned of Luca's childhood, of the constant pressure to live up to the Moretti name, of the violence he had witnessed, the sacrifices he had made. She saw the pain behind his mask of indifference, the yearning for a different life, a life free from the shadow of his family's legacy. Luca, in turn, saw past Sophia's carefully constructed facade, past the image of the dutiful Ricci daughter, the grieving widow. He saw the strength beneath her vulnerability, the fire that still burned within her, the longing for something more than duty, something beyond the confines of her gilded cage. You are not what I expected, he said softly, his gaze lingering on her face. You are stronger. More defiant. Sophia felt a blush creep up her cheeks, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with his words, his gaze. And you, she replied, her voice equally soft, are not the monster I was taught to fear. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, transforming his features, making him look younger, less burdened. Perhaps we are both victims of our family's lies, he said. As midnight approached, the palazzo grew quiet, the servants retired, the lights dimmed. Sophia and Luca remained in the library, lost in their shared quest, their shared connection. There's something else, Sophia said, her voice hesitant. Something I haven't told you. She retrieved a small, locked box from a hidden compartment behind one of the bookshelves. It was a box her mother had given her years ago, a box she had never opened, a box that contained secrets of her own. My mother gave me this before she died, Sophia said, her hands trembling as she held the box. She told me it contained the truth. The truth about our families, about everything. Luca watched her, his eyes filled with anticipation. What's inside? Sophia hesitated. She knew that opening the box would unleash forces she couldn't control, that it would change their lives forever. But she also knew that she couldn't keep the secrets hidden any longer. It was time for the truth to come out, no matter the cost. I don't know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But I think it's time we found out. She took a deep breath and inserted a small, ornate key into the lock. The key turned with a soft click, and the lid of the box sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object, a gold locket, intricately engraved with the intertwined crests of the Ricci and Moretti families. And inside, there was a folded piece of paper. Luca was ready to see what was inside. The words, the truth. It was a confession. Chapter 8. The Price of Loyalty. Sophia carefully unfolded the brittle paper, her hands trembling with anticipation and a growing sense of dread. The script was faint, faded, but unmistakably her mother's. As she read, the words seemed to leap off the page, each syllable a blow to her heart, a shattering of everything she had ever believed. The confession was a detailed account of a long-held secret, a conspiracy that reached the highest echelons of both the Ricci and Moretti families. It revealed that Caterina Moretti's death had not been an accident, nor had it been a simple act of revenge. It had been a carefully orchestrated murder, designed to cover up a far greater crime. The crime, as revealed in the letter, was a long-standing scheme of embezzlement and money laundering, involving key members of both families, including, shockingly, Sophia's own father, Don Alessandro Ricci, and Luca's uncle, Marco Moretti, the current consigliere to Luca's father. Caterina had stumbled upon the truth and had threatened to expose them. They, in turn, had silenced her permanently. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. The letter revealed that Sophia's husband, Carlo, had not died in a Moretti hit, as everyone believed. He had been involved in the scheme, and when he had threatened to confess, he, too, had been silenced. By his own father. By Don Alessandro. Sophia felt the room spin, the weight of the revelation crushing her. Her father, the man she had revered, the man she had obeyed, without question, was a murderer. He had killed his own son-in-law, and he had allowed the blame to fall on the Morettis, perpetuating the cycle of violence and hatred. Luca, who had been reading over her shoulder, let out a low growl of rage. "My uncle," he said, his voice filled with disbelief and fury. "I knew he was ruthless, but this." He paced the room, his hands clenched into fists. "They used us, Sophia," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "They used our families, our hatred, to cover up their own greed." Sophia sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling. She had spent her entire life believing in the righteousness of her family, in the honor of the Ricci name. Now, she saw that it was all a lie, a carefully constructed facade built on a foundation of deceit and bloodshed. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Luca stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes filled with a chilling determination. We expose them, he said. We bring them to justice. We end this cycle of violence, once and for all. Sophia knew that he was right. But she also knew the risks. Exposing her father and Luca's uncle would mean tearing apart both families, igniting a war that could consume them all. It would mean betraying everything she had ever stood for, shattering the foundations of her world. It won't be easy, she said, her voice trembling. They are powerful. They will fight back. Luca met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. I know, he said. But we are not alone. We have each other. And we have the truth. He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. We will do this together, Sophia, he said. We will face them, and we will win. Sophia squeezed his hand, her heart filled with a mix of fear and determination. She had made her choice. She would stand with Luca, against her own family, against the forces that had sought to control her, to silence her. She would fight for the truth, for justice, for a future free from the shadow of the past. The decision was final. She had her answer. There was no turning back. Chapter 9. A Dance with Danger. The decision made, a new sense of urgency settled over them. They knew they had to act quickly, before their discovery was revealed and their enemies had a chance to silence them. 2. The wedding, now just days away, loomed over them like a dark cloud, a constant reminder of the charade they were forced to maintain. They decided to use the wedding as a cover, a way to gather information, to identify their allies, to plan their next move. They would play the roles of the dutiful bride and groom, while secretly working to unravel the conspiracy that had entangled their families. The first step was to find proof, concrete evidence that would corroborate the confession in Sophia's mother's letter. They knew that Don Alessandro and Marco Moretti would have covered their tracks meticulously, leaving no trace of their involvement. But there had to be something, some overlooked detail, some hidden record that would expose their crimes. Sophia focused on her father's affairs, using her access to the Palazzo's records, her intimate knowledge of his routines, her seemingly unquestioning loyalty, to her advantage. She spent hours poring over financial documents, legal contracts, searching for any anomaly, any discrepancy that would betray his involvement. Luca, meanwhile, focused on his uncle, Marco. He used his position as the Moretti heir, his familiarity with a family's inner workings, to gain access to information, to observe, to listen. He knew that his uncle was a cunning and ruthless man, a master of manipulation, but he also knew that he was arrogant, that he believed himself to be untouchable. Their investigation was a delicate dance, a constant balancing act between maintaining their cover and uncovering the truth. They met in secret late at night, in the library, sharing their findings, their suspicions, their fears. The bond between them deepened, forged in the crucible of danger, fueled by their shared purpose and a growing, unspoken attraction. One evening, as Sophia was examining a series of old bank statements, she discovered a hidden account, a numbered account in a Swiss bank, an account that had been used to funnel vast sums of money over the years. The account was in Don Alessandro's name, but the transactions were linked to a series of shell corporations, companies that Luca recognized as being controlled by his uncle. This is it, Sophia said, her voice trembling with excitement. This is the proof we need. Luca examined the documents, his eyes narrowed. It's not enough, he said. We need to link these transactions directly to the embezzlement, to the money laundering. We need to show that this money was stolen, that it was used for illegal purposes. Sophia knew that he was right. The account was a smoking gun, but they needed more. They needed a witness, someone who could testify to the conspiracy, someone who could corroborate their findings. There's one person who might know something, Luca said, his voice hesitant. Someone who was close to my mother, someone she trusted. He was referring to his mother's former maid, a woman named Rosa, who had been dismissed shortly after Caterina's death. Luca had always suspected that Rosa knew more than she had revealed, that she had been silenced, threatened into keeping quiet. Do you think she'll talk? Sophia asked.
Luca shrugged. I don't know, he said.
But we have to try. She's our only hope. Finding Rosa would be their mission. They needed to find answers. Chapter 10. broken vows, and new alliances. Finding Rosa proved to be more challenging than they anticipated. After leaving the Moretti household, she had seemingly vanished, leaving no trace of her whereabouts. Luca used his contacts within the Neapolitan underworld, leveraging his family's influence and his own growing reputation to track her down. After days of searching, they finally received a lead. Rosa was living in a small, secluded village in the mountains outside Naples, under an assumed name, working as a seamstress. She had built a new life for herself, a life far removed from the violence and intrigue of the Moretti family. Sofia and Luca decided to travel to the village together, under the guise of a pre-wedding outing, a romantic escape from the pressures of the impending nuptials. The journey was tense, filled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. They knew that confronting Rosa would be risky, that she might refuse to talk, that she might even betray them to their enemies. They arrived in the village late in the afternoon, the air crisp and cool, the scent of pine and wood smoke filling their senses. The village was a picture of rustic tranquility, a stark contrast to the opulence and danger of their lives in Naples. They found Rosa's small cottage at the edge of the village, a modest dwelling with a flower-filled garden and a breathtaking view of the surrounding mountains. Sofia knocked on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. After a moment, the door opened, and a woman stood before them, her face etched with lines of age and hardship, her eyes wary and suspicious. It was Rosa. She recognized Luca immediately, her eyes widening in surprise and fear. "Signor Moretti," she said, her voice trembling. What are you doing here?" Luca stepped forward, his expression gentle. "Rosa, we need to talk," he said. "It's about my mother." Rosa's face paled. She glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to appear, to silence her. I don't know anything," she stammered. "I haven't worked for your family in years." "We know you know something, Rosa," Sofia said, stepping forward. "We know about the secrets, about the conspiracy. We know that your silence was bought." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She looked from Luca to Sofia, her expression a mixture of fear and relief. I have been living in fear for years," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Afraid that they would come for me, that they would silence me, too." "We can protect you, Rosa," Luca said. "We can help you. But you need to tell us the truth. You need to tell us what you know." Rosa hesitated, her gaze flickering between them. She was torn between her fear of reprisal and her desire for justice, for peace. Finally, she nodded, her decision made. "Come inside," she said, her voice trembling. "I will tell you everything." Inside the small, cozy cottage, Rosa recounted her story, a story of fear, intimidation, and betrayal. She confirmed Sofia's and Luca's suspicions, revealing that Caterina had discovered the embezzlement scheme, that she had confronted Marco Moretti and Don Alessandro, and that they had ordered her murder. She also revealed that Carlo, Sofia's husband, had been involved and had been killed when he threatened to expose them. Rosa's testimony was the final piece of the puzzle, the concrete evidence they needed to bring down their enemies. But as she spoke, a chilling realization dawned on Sofia. The wedding, the elaborate charade, was not just a cover for their investigation. It was a trap set by her father and Luca's uncle, a way to eliminate them both, to silence them permanently, to ensure that their secrets remained buried forever. The plan was dangerous, but they needed to act fast. Chapter 11. The Serpent in the Garden. The realization that the wedding was a trap sent a wave of fear and adrenaline through Sofia. She looked at Luca, his face grim, his eyes reflecting the same understanding, the same sense of impending danger. They had been so focused on uncovering the truth, on seeking justice, that they had overlooked the obvious. Their enemies had been one step ahead of them all along. "They know," Sofia whispered, her voice trembling. "They know we're close to exposing them." Luca nodded, his jaw tight. "They're planning to use the wedding to get rid of us. To make it look like an accident, a tragic consequence of the old feud." The thought of their families, their guests, gathered together, unsuspecting, while their enemies plotted their demise, filled Sofia with a chilling sense of dread. She couldn't let it happen. She couldn't let her father, Marco Moretti, get away with their crimes. "We need to warn them," Sophia said, her voice urgent. "We need to expose them before it's too late." Luca shook his head.
"We can't," he said.
"Not yet. If we tip them off, they'll change their plans. They'll find another way to silence us. We need to use the wedding to our advantage. We need to turn their trap against them." Sophia knew that he was right. They had to be strategic, cunning, ruthless. They had to play the game, to maintain the charade, while secretly working to expose their enemies. But how? How could they possibly outmaneuver two of the most powerful, most dangerous men in Naples? As they discussed their options, a plan began to take shape, a daring, dangerous plan that relied on their combined knowledge, their resources, their growing trust in each other. They would use the wedding ceremony itself, the moment of their supposed union, to expose the truth, to reveal the conspiracy to everyone present, to shatter the foundations of their family's power. They knew that it was a risky gamble, that it could backfire, that it could lead to violence, to chaos, to their own deaths. But they also knew that it was their only chance, their only hope of achieving justice, of breaking free from the cycle of violence and hatred that had consumed their families for generations. Their plan involved several key elements. First, they needed to secure Rosa's testimony to ensure that she would be safe and able to speak out at the appropriate moment. They decided to enlist the help of a trusted contact within the Carabinieri, the Italian National Police, a man named Inspector Lorenzo, who had a reputation for integrity and a history of clashing with the powerful mafia families. Second, they needed to gather the evidence, the financial documents, the letters, Rosa's sworn statement, and organize it in a way that would be clear, concise, irrefutable. They spent hours working together, meticulously documenting every detail of the conspiracy, preparing a presentation that would leave no room for doubt. Third, they needed to control the narrative, to ensure that their message would be heard, that their enemies wouldn't be able to spin the story, to discredit them. They decided to leak information to a trusted journalist, a woman named Isabella Rossi, no relation to the dressmaker, who had a reputation for investigative reporting and a willingness to challenge the established order. Finally, and most importantly, they needed to be prepared for anything. They knew that their enemies would not go down without a fight, that they would resort to violence, to intimidation, to any means necessary to protect themselves. They had to be ready to defend themselves, to protect each other, to survive. As the wedding day approached, the tension mounted. Sophia and Luca moved through the preparations with a forced smile, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They were walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of disaster. One wrong move could send them plummeting into the abyss. The wedding would not be as expected. The families were about to collide. Chapter 12. Scars of the Heart. The day before the wedding, a palpable tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sophia found herself unable to focus on the final preparations, the endless stream of well-wishers, the forced smiles and empty platitudes. Her mind was consumed with the plan, with the risks, with the potential consequences. She sought refuge in the Palazzo's gardens, a place that had once been a sanctuary, a place of beauty and tranquility. But now, even the vibrant colors of the flowers, the soothing sounds of the fountains, couldn't ease her anxiety. The garden felt tainted, a serpent lurking beneath the surface of its beauty. As she walked, she noticed a figure standing in the shadows of an ancient olive tree. It was Luca. He looked as troubled as she felt, his face etched with worry, his eyes dark with a mixture of determination and fear. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice low, as she approached. Sophia nodded, understanding. "Neither could I." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle rustling of the leaves in the breeze. The weight of their shared burden, the unspoken fears, hung heavy between them. "Are you afraid?" Luca asked, his gaze searching her face. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," she admitted. "But I'm also determined. I won't let them win. I won't let them destroy everything." Luca reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. "We'll face this together, Sophia," he said. "We'll get through this." His words, his touch, gave her a renewed sense of strength, a courage she hadn't known she possessed. She squeezed his hand, her heart filled with a mix of gratitude and a growing, undeniable affection. "There's something I need to tell you," Lucas said, his voice hesitant. "Something I should have told you sooner." He looked away, his expression troubled. "My father, he knows about us. About our investigation." Sophia's heart sank. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down her spine.
"How?"
she asked.
Luca sighed.
"I don't know for sure.
"But he's been watching me."
Closely. He suspects something. Does he know about Rosa?" Sophia asked, her voice urgent. Lucas shook his head. "I don't think so. I've been careful. But he knows we're up to something. He's warned me to stay away from you, to focus on the wedding." Sophia felt a wave of anger wash over her. Her father, Luca's uncle, they were all the same. Manipulative, controlling, willing to do anything to protect their power, their secrets. "They underestimate us," Sophia said, her voice filled with a newfound resolve. "They think we're just pawns in their game. They don't realize that we're the ones who are going to change the rules." Luca looked at her, his eyes filled with admiration.
"You're right," he said.
"We're not pawns. We're something more." He pulled her closer, his body pressed against hers. She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw a flicker of something in his eyes that mirrored her own desire, her own defiance. He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that was different from their first, stolen kiss in the garden. This kiss was deeper, more passionate, a kiss that spoke of shared danger, shared purpose, shared love. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, their commitment to each other, their determination to fight for a future free from the shadows of the past. The scars in their past were deep, but they were willing to fight together for a better future. Chapter 13. Flight from the Gilded Cage. The kiss, though passionate and filled with a desperate longing, was short-lived. The reality of their situation, the impending danger, crashed down on them, pulling them back from the precipice of forbidden love. They knew they couldn't afford to be distracted, to let their emotions cloud their judgment. "We need to go," Lucas said, his voice rough with emotion. "We need to get Rosa to a safe place." Sophia nodded, her heart still racing from the intensity of their kiss. They had arranged for Inspector Lorenzo to meet them at a secure location outside the city, a small, discreet safe house used by the Carabinieri for witness protection. They slipped away from the palazzo unnoticed, using a back entrance that led to a network of narrow, winding streets. The city was alive with activity, the preparations for the wedding in full swing, unaware of the drama that was unfolding beneath the surface. As they drove, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that their every move was being monitored. She glanced nervously at the rearview mirror, scanning the crowded streets, searching for any sign of pursuit. "We're being followed," she said, her voice tight with anxiety. Luca glanced at the mirror, his expression grim. "I see them," he said. "2 cars. Black sedans. They've been on us since we left the palazzo." He accelerated, weaving through the narrow streets, trying to lose their pursuers. But the black sedans stayed with them, their drivers skilled, determined. "We need to get off the main roads," Sophia said. "We need to find a place to hide." Luca nodded, his eyes scanning the streets ahead. He spotted a narrow alleyway, a dark, winding passage that led into the heart of the old city. He swerved into the alley, the car tires screeching against the cobblestones. The alley was a labyrinth of narrow passages, crumbling buildings, and hidden courtyards. It was a place where secrets were kept, where deals were made, where lives were bought and sold. It was a perfect place to disappear, to lose their pursuers. Luca drove deeper into the alley, the darkness closing in around them. The black sedans followed, their headlights cutting through the gloom. The chase was on. They raced through the narrow passages, the engine roaring, the tires squealing, the adrenaline pumping through their veins. Sophia held on tight, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. Suddenly, Luca slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt in a small, hidden courtyard. He killed the engine, plunging them into darkness. Get out, he said, his voice urgent. We'll go on foot. They scrambled out of the car, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They ran through the courtyard, their shadows dancing on the walls, their breath coming in ragged gasps. They found a narrow passageway, a hidden staircase that led up to the rooftops. They climbed the stairs, their legs burning, their lungs aching. They reached the roof, the city spread out before them, a glittering tapestry of lights and shadows. Luca checked if someone had followed them. They were alone, but not for too long. Chapter 14. Sanctuary in the Storm. The rooftop offered a precarious refuge, a temporary respite from the relentless pursuit. The cool night air whipped around them, carrying the distant sounds of the city, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked below. They huddled together in the shadows of a crumbling chimney, their bodies pressed close, their breaths mingling in the darkness. We lost them, Sophia said, her voice barely a whisper, her chest heaving from exertion. Luca nodded, his eyes scanning the surrounding rooftops, searching for any sign of their pursuers. For now, he said, but they'll be back. They won't give up. They knew they couldn't stay on the rooftops forever. They needed to reach Inspector Lorenzo, to get Rosa to safety, to expose the conspiracy before it was too late. But how? They were trapped, surrounded, with no clear escape route. As they considered their options, Sophia noticed a small, unassuming building across the street, a building that looked familiar. It was a church, the Church of San Gennaro, a place she had often visited as a child, a place of solace and refuge. The church, she said, pointing to the building. We can hide there. Luca looked at the church, his expression hesitant.
It's risky, he said.
It's too obvious. They'll be looking for us there. But it's also a sanctuary, Sophia said. A place of God. They won't dare to violate it. Luca knew that she was right. In their world, even the most ruthless criminals, the most hardened gangsters, observed a certain code of respect for the church. It was a sacred space, a neutral ground, a place where even enemies could find temporary refuge. They made their way across the rooftops, carefully navigating the treacherous terrain, their movements silent, their senses heightened. They reached the edge of the roof, overlooking the street below. They could see the black sedans circling, their occupants searching for them. They waited for a break in the traffic, a moment of opportunity. Then, with a shared glance, a silent understanding, they leaped across the narrow gap, landing on the roof of the church. They found a small, unlocked window that led into the church's bell tower. They slipped inside, the darkness enveloping them, the scent of incense and old stone filling their senses. They descended the narrow, winding staircase, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They reached the main sanctuary, the vast, empty space filled with rows of pews, the flickering candles casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The church was a place of peace, of tranquility, a world away from the violence and danger that had consumed their lives. They found a small alcove, a hidden confessional, and huddled together, their bodies pressed close, their hearts pounding in unison. They were safe for now. But they knew that their sanctuary was temporary, that their enemies would eventually find them. They had to find a way to contact Inspector Lorenzo, to get Rosa to safety, to expose the conspiracy before it was too late. As they waited, Sophia reached for Luca's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. Their touch, a silent connection, a source of strength and comfort in the midst of the storm. The silence stretched. Sophia realized that their destinies were intertwined. Chapter 15. Reckoning with the Past. The silence of the confessional was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner, each tick a stark reminder of the dwindling time they had left. Sophia leaned her head against Luca's shoulder, drawing strength from his presence, the steady beat of his heart a comforting rhythm against her ear. What happens now? She whispered, her voice barely audible even in the confined space. Luca tightened his grip on her hand. We wait, he said. We wait for Lorenzo. He knows we're in trouble. He'll find us. But waiting was the hardest part. The silence amplified their fears, their doubts, their uncertainties. Sophia found her mind drifting back to the past, to the events that had led them to this precarious situation. She thought of her mother, of Katerina, of the secrets they had kept, the sacrifices they had made. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, her voice filled with a melancholic longing, "what our lives would have been like if things had been different? If our families hadn't been enemies?" Luca sighed, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "I imagine a world where we could have met under different circumstances, where we wouldn't have to hide, to fear, to fight." Sophia closed her eyes, picturing that alternate reality, a world where she and Luca could have met as ordinary people, where their love wouldn't be forbidden, where their families wouldn't be torn apart by hatred and violence. "It's a nice dream," she said, a wistful smile touching her lips. "But it's just that, a dream." Luca nodded, his expression somber. "Our reality is different," he said. "But that doesn't mean we can't change it. That doesn't mean we can't create a new future, a future where our children won't have to live with this curse." His words resonated with Sophia, stirring a hope within her, a belief that they could break the cycle of violence, that they could build a better future, not just for themselves, but for their families, for their city. As they sat in silence, lost in their thoughts, they heard a faint sound, a soft tapping at the main entrance of a church. Luca tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol he had concealed beneath his jacket. "Lorenzo?" Sophia whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. Luca nodded, his eyes fixed on the entrance. "It has to be," he said. "No one else knows we're here." He cautiously made his way to the entrance, his movements silent, his senses heightened. He peered through the small peephole in the door, his eyes scanning the dimly lit street outside. He saw a familiar figure standing on the steps of the church, a tall, imposing man with a stern face and a determined gaze. It was Inspector Lorenzo. Luca quickly unlocked the door, pulling Lorenzo inside. "We're in here," he said, his voice low. Lorenzo followed him to the confessional, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw Sophia. "Signora Ricci," he said, his voice filled with concern. "Are you all right?" "We're fine," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly. "But we're in danger. They know about our investigation. They're trying to kill us." Lorenzo nodded, his expression grim. "I figured as much," he said. "I've been trying to reach you. Your phones are off." "We had to ditch them," Luca explained. "They were tracking us." Lorenzo listened intently as they recounted their escape, their discovery of the trap, their plan to expose the conspiracy at the wedding. He agreed with their strategy, offering his support, his resources, his protection. "I have a team on standby," Lorenzo said. "They're ready to move in when you give the signal. We'll arrest them all. Your father, Marco Moretti, everyone involved." Sophia and Luca exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They had reached a turning point, a moment of reckoning. They were ready to face their enemies, to expose their crimes, to bring them to justice. The time was almost here. They needed to get ready. Chapter 16. Flames of Rebellion. With Inspector Lorenzo's arrival, a fragile sense of security settled over them. They had a plan, allies, and the element of surprise, or so they hoped. Lorenzo outlined the details of his operation. A team of plainclothes officers would be strategically positioned throughout the palazzo during the wedding ceremony, ready to move in at Sophia and Luca's signal. The journalist, Isabella Rossi, had been briefed and was prepared to publish her expose the moment the arrests were made. "We need to be absolutely certain about the timing," Lorenzo emphasized, his gaze shifting between Sophia and Luca. "Any premature move, and they'll slip through our fingers. They're powerful, well-connected. We need irrefutable proof, presented at the right moment, to ensure they can't weasel their way out." Sophia nodded, her mind racing through the details of their plan. The ceremony would be the focal point. She would deliver her vows, but instead of pledging her love and obedience to Luca, she would expose the truth, revealing the contents of her mother's confession, the evidence they had gathered, Rose's testimony. Luca would support her, confirming her accusations, adding his own knowledge of the Moretti family's involvement. The thought of confronting her father, of publicly accusing him of murder, sent a wave of nausea through Sophia. But she pushed it aside, steeling herself for the task ahead. She had to do this, not just for herself, for Luca, but for the memory of her mother, of Katerina, of all those who had suffered at the hands of their family's greed and ambition. As the hours dwindled down to the wedding, Sophia and Luca returned to the palazzo, their movements carefully orchestrated to avoid suspicion. They played their roles, the dutiful bride and groom, their faces masks of calm, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The palazzo was a hive of activity, buzzing with excitement. With the arrival of guests, the preparations reaching a fever pitch. Sophia moved through it all like a ghost, her mind focused on the task ahead, her senses heightened, watching, listening, waiting for the right moment. She saw her father, Don Alessandro, his face a mask of paternal pride, his eyes cold and calculating. She saw Marco Moretti, Luca's uncle, his expression smug, his demeanor confident, unaware of the storm that was about to break. As the ceremony began, Sophia felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She walked down the aisle, her arm linked with her father's, the eyes of everyone present fixed on her. She saw Luca waiting at the altar, his expression unreadable, his gaze intense. The priest began the ceremony, his voice booming through the grand hall, the traditional words of marriage echoing through the space. Sophia listened, her mind racing, her heart pounding, waiting for her cue. When the moment came, when the priest asked her if she would take Luca as her husband, Sophia took a deep breath, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the hall. "I cannot," she said, her words shattering the silence, sending a wave of shock and confusion through the assembled guests. Don Alessandro's face turned ashen, his eyes widening in disbelief. Marco Moretti's smile vanished, replaced by a look of fury. Sophia continued, her voice unwavering, her gaze fixed on her father. "I cannot marry Luca Moretti," she said, "because this marriage is a lie. A sham. A cover-up for a conspiracy that has spanned decades, a conspiracy that has cost the lives of innocent people, including my own husband and Luca's mother." She was ready to expose the truth. The moment of reckoning had finally arrived. Everyone gasped. Chapter 17. The Cost of Freedom. Sophia's words hung in the air, a thunderclap that shattered the illusion of unity and celebration. A collective gasp swept through the hall, followed by a cacophony of whispers, murmurs, and exclamations of disbelief. Don Alessandro stood frozen, his face a mask of rage and betrayal, while Marco Moretti's eyes darted around the room, assessing the situation, calculating his next move. Sophia continued, her voice gaining strength, fueled by years of suppressed anger, grief, and a burning desire for justice. She revealed the contents of her mother's confession, the details of the embezzlement scheme, the evidence they had gathered, Rosa's testimony. She spoke of Katerina's murder, of Carlo's death, of the web of lies and deceit that had entangled their families for generations. As she spoke, Luca stepped forward, his voice echoing hers, confirming her accusations, adding his own knowledge of the Moretti family's involvement. He spoke of his uncle's ruthlessness, of his father's complicity, of the years of silence, of the burden of guilt he had carried. The assembled guests, members of the most powerful mafia families in Naples, listened in stunned silence. Some were shocked, horrified by the revelations. Others were skeptical, unwilling to believe that their leaders, their families, could be capable of such crimes. Don Alessandro finally found his voice a venomous snarl. "She's lying," he shouted, his face contorted with rage. "She's delusional. She's been manipulated by this Moretti." But his words rang hollow, his authority diminished. The evidence was too compelling, the accusations too damning. Marco Moretti, realizing that the game was up, made a move. He signaled to his men, a group of heavily armed guards positioned strategically throughout the hall. "Take them," he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. "Kill them both." But before his men could react, Inspector Lorenzo's team moved in, their movements swift and efficient. They disarmed Marco's guards, arresting them, securing the perimeter. Lorenzo stepped forward, his voice booming through the hall. Don Alessandro Ricci, Marco Moretti, you are under arrest, he announced. You are charged with conspiracy, embezzlement, money laundering, and murder. Chaos erupted. Some of the guests tried to flee. Others tried to intervene, to protect their families. But Lorenzo's team held firm, maintaining order, preventing any further violence. Don Alessandro, his face a mask of fury and defiance, lunged at Sofia, his hands reaching for her throat. You traitor! He screamed. You will pay for this. But Luca intercepted him, blocking his attack, protecting Sofia. They grappled, their bodies locked in a struggle, the years of hatred, of resentment, of betrayal, culminating in a violent confrontation. Luca, younger and stronger, overpowered his uncle, slamming him against the altar, disarming him. He held him there, his face inches from his eyes burning with a righteous fury. It's over, Luca said, his voice low and dangerous. It's all over. The truth was out, but it was not enough. Sofia and Luca stared at each other. They were free, but they were wounded. Chapter 18. Betrayal's Bitter Sting. The aftermath of the confrontation was a chaotic swirl of flashing lights, shouted commands, and the clatter of handcuffs. Don Alessandro and Marco Moretti were hauled away, their protests and threats echoing through the now empty hall. The guests, a mixture of stunned onlookers and implicated accomplices, were dispersed, their faces etched with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and, for some, a grudging respect for Sofia and Luca's audacious act. Sofia stood amidst the wreckage of her former life, the shattered remnants of family loyalty and tradition scattered around her like broken glass. The weight of her actions, the enormity of the upheaval she had caused, pressed down on her, leaving her feeling numb and strangely detached. Luca approached her, his face bruised and bloodied from his struggle with his uncle, but his eyes filled with a quiet strength, a fierce determination that mirrored her own. Are you all right? He asked, his voice gentle, his hand reaching out to touch her cheek, a gesture of comfort and reassurance. Sofia nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She was physically unharmed, but the emotional wounds, the scars of betrayal and loss, ran deep. She had shattered the foundations of her world, exposed the darkness that had lurked beneath the surface of her family's opulent life. As they stood there, amidst the chaos, Inspector Lorenzo approached them, his expression somber. I have some difficult news, he said, his gaze shifting between Sofia and Luca. Sofia's heart sank. She had a premonition, a sense of impending doom. Rosa, Lorenzo said, his voice heavy with regret.
She's dead.
Sofia felt the blood drain from her face. What? She whispered, her voice barely audible.
How?
Lorenzo explained that Rosa had been found dead in the safe house, just hours before the wedding. The cause of death was initially ruled as a heart attack, but further investigation revealed traces of a rare, undetectable poison. They got to her, Luca said, his voice filled with a chilling rage. Even after we thought she was safe, they still managed to silence her. Sofia felt a wave of guilt and grief wash over her. Rosa, the woman who had risked everything to help them, to expose the truth, had paid the ultimate price. Her death was a stark reminder of the ruthlessness of their enemies, of the lengths they would go to protect their secrets. We have enough evidence, Lorenzo said, trying to offer a semblance of reassurance. The documents, the confession, your testimony, it's enough to convict them. Rosa's death, it's a tragedy, but it won't derail the case. But Sofia knew that it wasn't just about the case. It was about justice, about honor, about the countless lives that had been destroyed by her family's greed and ambition. Rosa's death was a bitter sting, a reminder of the cost of freedom, the price of truth. As they left the palazzo, the scene of their triumph and their tragedy, Sofia felt a profound sense of emptiness, a void that could never be filled. She had won. She had exposed the conspiracy. She had brought her enemies to justice. But she had also lost everything. Her family, her home, her sense of belonging. The betrayal had cost her a lot. She was alone. Or so, that is what she thought. Chapter 19. A Love Forged in Fire. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and the painful process of dismantling the intricate web of corruption that had defined their families for generations. Sophia and Luca found themselves thrust into the unwelcome spotlight, their lives dissected, their motives questioned, their every action scrutinized. They faced the storm together, their bond forged in the crucible of danger and betrayal, strengthened by their shared commitment to justice and a growing, undeniable love. They leaned on each other, drawing strength from their shared vulnerability, their shared pain, their shared hope for a better future. The trials of Don Alessandro Ricci and Marco Moretti were lengthy and complex, attracting international attention. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies damning. They were both found guilty on all charges, sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The verdicts brought a sense of closure, a measure of justice, but they couldn't erase the scars, the wounds that ran deep. Sophia struggled with the weight of her actions. The knowledge that she had brought down her own father shattered her family's legacy. Luca, too, grappled with the aftermath of the trials. He had exposed his uncle, his father's complicity, and he now faced the daunting task of rebuilding the Moretti empire, of cleansing it of its corruption, of restoring its honor. Despite the challenges, the pain, the uncertainties, Sophia and Luca found solace in each other's company. They spent hours talking, sharing their fears, their hopes, their dreams. They explored the city together, discovering hidden corners, quiet sanctuaries, places where they could escape the weight of their past, the pressures of their present. One evening, as they walked along the waterfront, the setting sun casting a golden glow on the Bay of Naples, Luca turned to Sophia, his eyes filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I know things haven't been easy," he said, his voice soft, his hand reaching out to take hers. "I know we've both been through hell. But I also know that I love you, Sophia. I love you more than I ever thought possible." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She had known, of course, that her feelings for Luca had deepened, that their shared ordeal had forged a bond between them that transcended family, loyalty, even duty. But hearing him say the words, seeing the raw emotion in his eyes, filled her with a joy, a hope that she had thought lost forever. "I love you, too, Luca," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I love you more than words can say." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight, as if he were afraid to let go. They stood there, silhouetted against the fiery sunset, their bodies pressed together, their hearts beating in unison. "We can build a new life, Sophia," Luca said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "A life free from the shadows of the past. A life based on love, on trust, on honesty." Sophia nodded, her tears mingling with the sea spray on her cheeks. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges, obstacles, setbacks. But she also knew that, with Luca by her side, she could face anything. They had each other, their love. They were not alone. And, for the first time, the future seemed brighter. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. Months passed. The initial shockwaves of the trials and their aftermath gradually subsided, replaced by a fragile sense of rebuilding and renewal. Sophia and Luca, now free from the suffocating constraints of their family's expectations, began to explore the possibilities of their newfound freedom, their shared love a beacon guiding them through the uncertain terrain. They decided to leave Naples, to escape the constant reminders of their past, the lingering whispers and judgmental gazes. They chose to settle in a small, picturesque village on the Amalfi Coast, a place of breathtaking beauty, far removed from the violence and intrigue of the city. They bought a small villa overlooking the sea, a haven of peace and tranquility, where they could heal, rebuild, and create a new life together. They spent their days exploring the coastline, discovering hidden coves, hiking through lemon groves, savoring the simple pleasures of life, their love deepening with each passing day. But the past, like a persistent shadow, continued to haunt them. They received news that Don Alessandro, weakened by age and illness, had died in prison. Sophia, despite everything, felt a pang of grief, a complex mix of sadness, anger, and a lingering sense of filial duty. Then, one evening, as they sat on their terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple, they received an unexpected visitor. A young woman, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination, stood before them. "Signora Ricci, Signor Moretti," she said, her voice trembling. "My name is Isabella Rossi. I am Marco Moretti's daughter." Sophia and Luca exchanged a surprised glance. They had known that Marco had a daughter, but she had always been kept out of the family business, shielded from the darkness that had consumed her father. What do you want?" Luca asked, his voice cautious. Isabella hesitated, her gaze flickering between them. I need your help," she said. "I know what my father did. I know about the crimes, and I wanted to make amends. I want to help you rebuild, to restore the honor of our families." Sophia and Luca were skeptical. They had been betrayed too many times, their trust shattered by the actions of their families. Could they trust Marco's daughter? Was she genuine, or was this another trap, another attempt to deceive them? "Why should we trust you?" Sophia asked, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. Isabella met her gaze, her eyes filled with a sincerity that seemed genuine. "Because I am not my father," she said. "I want no part of his world. I wanted to build a better future. A future based on honesty, on integrity, on justice." She revealed that she had been secretly working with Inspector Lorenzo, providing him with information, helping him to dismantle the remnants of her father's criminal network. She had evidence, documents, contacts that could help them to recover the stolen assets, to rebuild the businesses that had been destroyed by the corruption. Sophia and Luca listened, their initial skepticism gradually giving way to a cautious hope. They saw in Isabella a reflection of themselves, a yearning for redemption, a desire to break free from the cycle of violence and betrayal. "We will help you, Isabella," Sophia said, her voice filled with a newfound determination. "We will work together. We will rebuild. We will create a new legacy, a legacy based on love, on trust, on honor." Luca nodded, his hand reaching out to take Sophia's, their fingers intertwining, a symbol of their enduring bond, their shared commitment to a better future. The final confrontation was not a battle with weapons or violence, but a confrontation of hearts and loyalties, a choice between the darkness of the past and the promise of a brighter future. They were ready to work, to change. The end was a new beginning. They were ready to embrace it. Epilogue. 5 years later, the villa on the Amalfi Coast was filled with the sounds of laughter, the aromas of a home-cooked meal, and the vibrant energy of a family gathering. Sophia and Luca, their love deepened by time and shared experience, stood on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in a breathtaking display of color. They were not alone. Isabella Rossi, now a close friend and confidant, stood beside them, her arm linked with a young man, a lawyer named Alessandro, whom she had met during her work with Inspector Lorenzo. They were engaged to be married, their love a testament to the possibility of healing and renewal. Children played in the garden below, the sounds of their joyous shouts echoing through the air. They were the children of Luca's cousins, the next generation of the Moretti family, a generation free from the shadow of their ancestors' crimes, a generation raised with love, honesty, and a commitment to justice. Sophia and Luca had worked tirelessly to rebuild their families' reputations, to restore their businesses, to create a legacy of integrity and philanthropy. They had established foundations, supported charities, invested in education, and worked to create opportunities for the people of Naples, helping to heal the wounds of the past, to build a brighter future. They had also found peace, a sense of contentment and fulfillment that had eluded them for so long. They had faced their demons, confronted their past, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more deeply in love than ever before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a final, golden glow on the sea, Luca turned to Sophia, his eyes filled with a love that transcended time, circumstance, and the burdens of their past. "We did it, Sophia," he said, his voice soft, his hand reaching out to caress her cheek. "We broke the cycle. We created a new legacy." Sophia smiled, her eyes sparkling with tears of joy. "We did it together," she said, her voice filled with love and gratitude. "We found our way home." They embraced, their bodies pressed close, their hearts beating as one. The scars of the past remained, a reminder of the battles they had fought, the sacrifices they had made. But they were also a testament to their resilience, their strength, their enduring love. They had found their happy ending, a love story forged in fire, a testament to the power of forgiveness, redemption, and the enduring human spirit. They looked forward the future. They were, after all these years, truly happy.